I think for too long we have had policy making which have dealt with symptoms, not the deeper malaise. So which means regulation also, which then goes back to principle-based regulation. When I learned that academics also are very prone to biases, in the sense we like to believe there's a silver bullet. Such a cool idea, asset transfer kar denge, ye take off ho jayega, they'll move to the next phase and we'll be happy. Except it didn't happen. You see, China being China has a repressed domestic demand. So all that growth is not leading to commensurate increase in consumption by households.
Right.
While in India, you are seeing all of it is. Not only is it translated into household consumption, but it is spread across the country.
Right.
So I think the geography bit is important to talk about, right? You know, in a country like ours, there's all kinds of experiments happening from policy front as well. So when the reality, you know, your entire context is changing, to assume that control is sitting idle and not optimizing is a bit naive. India brought in minimum wage legislation and labor laws right after independence, within 10-15 years. And if you look at some of the conversations between Mahalanobis and Pandit Nehru, Mahalanobis had advised him against bringing in many of these. As an economist, I am now convinced that there's no dealing with development without dealing with economic growth.
Hello and welcome everyone. Very pleased to have with me today someone who's been a huge part of my life and my learning in economics, Shamika Ravi, who is now part of the PM's Economic Advisory Council. Welcome, Shamika. So happy to have you. Shamika, we start by asking everybody, what is your personal connection to economic growth? How did you come to realize it was a thing? When did you notice it? What was these sort of personal anecdotes from your life?
Well, first of all, 91, when things started to change, I was in grade 11. But when I went to college, that's when I realized that there was some excitement around economic policy making, right? But I think the greater realization happened, Rahul, from a policy perspective, because I spent the first 10 years of my PhD life mostly thinking of development from a very different, it's a development approach to improvement in quality of life is very different from a growth approach.
Yes.
And part of the training is that we get so fixated on the methodologies of measuring the impact of whatever little we might think is earth-shattering, that we miss the larger picture. So it's only around 2010, 9-10. A lot of it was learning from my own experience, which was that we are treating development completely separate from economic growth. And the more China grew, not that we condone everything that happens there, we are just a very different country. We have a lot more freedom, right? Even in terms of consumption. But this realization and appreciation is something you can't hide away, push away, that what economic growth can accomplish. It's very difficult for any partial interventions to try and achieve through this development mindset. So while I'm trained as a development economist, and I think like a development economist, for me, welfare and quality of life for individuals, citizens matters a lot. I think that is at the forefront of everything that I do. But I think the lever of achieving and the kind of weightage we ought to put on growth, I think is traditionally in the economic training, we haven't done justice to that.
Yeah.
So growth matters. Growth, I think, is the engine which spurs all of this.
Very true. Music to my ears, of course, because that's what we are all about. But, and was there a particular statistic or a particular, off late in your own work, the poverty statistic is so clear that you've shown. But for your own realization, was there something that particularly moved that switch, So again, because the reason I try to do this is because the same thing that you're saying, this realization that growth is so much more important than development, unfortunately, it's not as common as I wish it were.
Yeah.
And that's why I ask everyone, what brought you to this space? Because I'm hoping to help flick that switch for more and more people.
I think we have to attack the problem at its core, which is the training that we do. I think we do a poor training of linking growth and development. And I think this is not only because I did my PhD in the US, and therefore maybe NYU was particularly conditioned in I don't think it was an NYU
It's a very general problem.
It's a general problem, right?
Much.
Development, the way even my own initial randomized control trials that I would do, I would be very careful in trying to measure the impact of that marginal intervention. And in the process, I learned a great deal. But I'll tell you, there was one experiment, I think it's worth sharing, that, the targeting ultra-poor program that happened.
The microfinance one.
The microfinance
I remember this.
So this was across 8 countries. So this is the beginning of the replicability issue in economics, when the experiment was done across 8 countries and 10 sites, right? So this is a really large initiative.
Yeah.
And the idea was that these are ultra-poor people, which means they're destitute. They do not have an economic activity which can repay a loan.
Yeah.
So microfinance, therefore, was not the right instrument to lift them out of poverty. So then there had to be a transfer, not a loan.
Yeah.
So if it had to be a transfer, how would you design this anti-poverty program and give them a choice, of course, give households a choice. But eventually the transfer and all the other complementary training, financial training, etc., that went with it. The idea was in 18 months and then subsequently 3 years and so on, we would measure what impact it had on the households, right? Now, simple, quite appealing. When the results began to emerge, that's when the lessons hit us. But then the lessons are far more than just the economics of it. Number one, that while a few sites, naming Bangladesh, Pakistan, and West Bengal in India, they found an impact of this on consumption of households and income. In Andhra Pradesh, which was the largest of these sites, randomized control trial sites, we did not find any impact.
Right.
So this is Medak, Mehboob Nagar district. These are very poor districts. And when we did not find an impact, it takes you to the core of, well, what then?
Yeah.
And I think that is where the economics kicks in. Beyond the randomization and the way you do, I think the economics kicks in, that you then begin to look, sort of peel onions and go to the layer of what could be driving it.
Yeah.
And then we realize that this is the period of 2005-06 to 9-10. So these are the 5 years in the beginning of National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which really worked as lifting of a minimum wage across rural areas throughout India. But the extent of the impact on wages would depend on how the program was implemented.
Right.
And we all know that NREGA was the best implemented in Andhra.
Right.
Because they already had their smart card, they had already got the IT systems in place. It was a mission mode, the way the government implemented it there. And so what happened is that the real rural wages had risen almost 40% in those 3 years.
Right.
So the control group
also saw
an increase in consumption and income, and therefore the treatment through giving them these assets did not amount to anything in addition.
Yeah.
So what you saw was no net impact. In fact, then taught you that, well, people are not, this is not a laboratory. How much ever in economics we like to believe that randomized control trials give us very pure causal link, the reality is that ceteris paribus here does not hold.
Yeah.
Individuals are impacted by life around them, and governments are not idle either.
Yeah.
In a country like ours, there's all kinds of experiments happening from policy front as well. So when the reality, your entire context is changing, to assume that control is sitting idle and not optimizing is a bit naive.
Yeah.
So the lesson from that whole thing was, it told us external validity matters a lot.
Yes.
What could be working in one place need not necessarily work in the other. But if that is the case, what does it tell us then? right? And while all of this was happening, you're beginning to see even within Andhra, poverty fall.
And
Poverty fall massively,
yeah.
right? From 47% to 11%, within 20 years. That's when you realize, yeah, what am I doing? We are not looking at the core fundamental engine, which we ought to be burnishing and making better. So and of course, there is also the politics of publication and academia. True. When I learned that academics also are very prone to biases, in the sense we like to believe there's a silver bullet. It's such a cool idea, asset transfer kar denge, ye take off ho jayega, they'll move to the next phase and we'll be happy.
Yeah.
Except it didn't happen. So the reluctance to accept research, which is uncomfortable, and the way the publication process plays out.
The power of the null result, right? Like it's so powerful, and yet somehow you can't get a publication.
It was tough. Well, we got a Journal of Development Economics.
You got the publication, but it's so tough.
Yes.
It's so, null results are so difficult to publish, even though they can tell you so much about the world. Exactly like you're saying.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's a great story. And I, of course, was there to witness some of it.
But you know what else happened, Rahul, after that? That research was picked up, cited by Jim Heckman, by Angus Deaton, Townsend. So I think the development economists who have a much more structural bent of mind in trying to understand what development, what is at the heart of, and how complicated development is. I think they all appreciated that rather than seeing this as a limitation of RCT, we are not wedded to a methodology.
No, I mean, I cross my fingers, but I think we've turned the corner in the economics discipline on this RCT versus growth.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, this Nobel Prize after so long won for growth, so really important. Okay, thanks. Now let me ask you this question, because growth, poverty, you already mentioned these things. Some of your recent research has finally given us an update on the poverty numbers, right? Just how big the shift has been. Can you talk us through that, what your findings were and why they are so important to think about?
I think, first, Rahul, because this is a podcast and not a department seminar, I think for general audience, we have to tell them that poverty is traditionally measured as what's your level of consumption? Like, how much do you consume? How much do you spend on consumption? Now, the last household consumption expenditure we had, for which we have detailed unit level or household level data, was 2011-12. Now, after that, the most recent data, of course, is 23-24.
Yeah.
Now, in between, while we did not have good household level data, we came out with the multi-dimensional index, right, for poverty index. That is a very different way to look at poverty, because it looks at what are the amenities available. So it's very much a supply side story, right? That if you have drinking water, there's a school nearby, there's hospital nearby. So it really has to, and the quality of the housing, etc. This is really about infrastructure and amenities. Traditional household consumption expenditure looks at poverty in terms of how much food, clothing, footwear, travel, everything that we spend our money. So when the final data became available from MOSPI, and I must say MOSPI itself has, we should talk about it, turned a new leaf in the sense that we have very high quality and much higher frequency data now. So now it became available to look at, bhai, poverty ka kya hua? How are things changing? And the numbers, of course, it's a 12-year period, so it's long enough. And in a dynamic economy like India, the numbers should not surprise, but for me, they were a bit. 302 million people have come out of poverty if we consider the Rangarajan poverty line. Right? And the Rangarajan poverty line
yes, please.
is a little moderate. No, it's not the destitution, just the food.
It's quite high, actually. That's the point I wanted to make when I read your paper and I saw the very large drop. The context I wanted to add in was that the Rangarajan line was actually raised substantially after the Tendulkar line.
Absolutely.
Because there was such a hue and cry about how can you measure poverty at such a low rate.
Yes.
And in fact, in 2011-12, the Tendulkar line found that national poverty is something around 20%, right? And the Rangarajan line came back in and said, no, this is too low.
Yeah.
We'll raise it.
Almost 30%.
It was almost 30%.
Yeah.
And again, you find even if you raise the line, if growth keeps going, poverty drops.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's the, if you look at it across states, then it's even more stunning because it's not a Delhi, Bombay, Chennai, 102 or let's say industrial states or whatever. No, it's an all India story. Every state has managed to reduce poverty in very major way. And of course, then we go on to break it for individuals and so on.
Right.
But, it's very compelling. And as an economist, I am now, convinced that there's no dealing with development without dealing with economic growth.
Right. Absolutely. Such a powerful message. And maybe, Shamika, with your help, we can break this down a little bit more. Right? Again, I think your research has also shown this is often a criticism leveled at growth is that it's inequitable.
Yeah.
Right? So, not only are you showing that poverty drops, you show that for different parts of society, poverty drops. Can you tell us more about that?
One is the regional variation.
Yes, the states one that you mentioned.
And it's interesting because when we look at, and the only reason I remember state like Bihar so well is because Bihar has managed to reduce poverty much more and to a much lower level than all its neighbors.
Oh, that's interesting. Even the levels are lower.
Right.
Pace, of course, you would expect.
Pace you would expect given the base effect. But the fact that it's the lower level today compared to West Bengal, Jharkhand, Odisha, that tells you that growth is important, but the development strategy then becomes extremely important. Because remember, we are measuring consumption.
Right.
So what drives household consumption expenditure? Right. At that point, I think it's important to also explain or to understand that, while China's GDP is nearly 4.5-5 times the size of India, that's GDP. So per capita, there are clearly multiples. But if you look at household consumption expenditure, then the Chinese are just 1.5 times higher than the Indians. For that, you need to understand that GDP and just measuring it per capita assumes that everybody is getting everything.
Right.
That's why I think poverty metrics are so powerful.
Right.
Or consumption metrics become powerful. You see, China being China has a repressed domestic demand.
Yeah.
So all that growth is not leading to commensurate increase in consumption by households.
Right.
While in India, you are seeing all of it is, not only is it translated into household consumption, but it is spread across the country.
Right.
So I think the geography bit is important to talk about, right? Second, what we are able to do through a novel sort of a methodology is look at individuals within the household. Rahul.
Yeah, this is a new one. But before perhaps you get to individuals, you can talk about the groups. SC, ST.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is lifting of the tide and all boats are lifting, no? Because we are a democracy and elections are contested based on identities. A lot of our policies are based on targeting of certain communities and social groups. It becomes important then to also look at how welfare is distributed, in the sense, what has happened to poverty. And what you notice is that, of course, urban-rural differences were there, but the reduction in urban poverty, especially for Muslim group, is the largest, right? In fact, the difference between Hindu and Muslim groups in urban India in 2011 was very significant. Today, it's the same, similar. Similarly, if you look at scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBC, see, data makes a lot of this possible, right? So, because in democracy and electoral democracy, identity matters, and at the heart of it, a lot of conversations are driven on these kind of identities, it's important to then measure who have benefited from government policies. Right? And by government policy, of course, I'm also putting growth into that. But eventually, in the 11, 12 years that we are looking at, how have the destinies of different groups changed? And it is such a fantastic story. One that gives you, in fact, reaffirms the belief that economic growth, therefore, becomes fundamental for us to pursue, because every group, social group, religious group, has gained throughout the country.
Yeah. And this includes Muslims, Hindus, general caste, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes. And again, I think I want to re-emphasize this, because people often feel that we measure poverty at artificially low rates, hence, etc. I think the important thing is you have to have a marker, and any marker that you choose ends up showing this. When you earlier had the slightly low, although I actually feel the Tendulkar committee markers are also quite useful, they used to show very similar trends. Back in 2011-12, Dr. Panagari actually showed some of this stuff, right? Using the Tendulkar committee.
Was mostly food, right? So, so Rangarajan made the basket larger.
Yes.
Because then rental, health, education, conveyance, things that matter a lot.
It basically went up a lot more. Consumption went up a lot. Just a lot higher. And even using the higher line, now we're doing much better.
Much better.
And I think Lant Pritchett makes a lot of these points, right? That why are we setting the poverty line so low? Our ambitions should be much higher.
Absolutely.
If we set it very low, then those kinds of asset transfer programs, welfare redistribution becomes much more important. If the higher we set the poverty line, the more important growth becomes.
And I'll tell you, as far as the Modi government is concerned, for the last 12 years, we have pursued a policy of saturation, right? Which means that there are basic amenities which must be available to all citizens everywhere in the country. Now, given that we are setting benchmarks as far as, now that amenity basket is also expanding. It started with bank accounts.
Right.
It started with, access to telephony and simpler things. But now it's moved to much more, right? It went to toilets, then housing,
Piped water. Piped water.
Piped drinking water would be, for us, it's a dream.
Yeah.
Because first, I think while the movement is slower than, let's say, electrification, because the distribution
is harder,
and the infrastructure is that much more difficult, though it's happening at a decent pace. But you see now the poverty metrics will keep up with the same expectation that the government is setting for itself and its different departments.
Right.
Because saturation is something that will make sure that, we don't have to, again, that life of destitution, where, no electricity, forget food, but not having water, drinking water, not having road nearby, which was a lived reality until 10, 11 years back. At least that fundamental quality of life then gets elevated. From an economic point of view, Rahul, all of these have very direct bearing on productivity of a person.
Yeah.
Right? So human capital can also be harnessed only if it is within a context where basic amenities are available. So I sometimes think that what we have been through in the last 10 years and likely to in urban areas in the next 5-10 years is pretty much like, the US economy post the wars. It's like a massive scaling up of amenities. Right? And that has long-term, it's like a productivity impact for the next 100 years. Right? Everything is going to move because we make basic things available. So I think metrics of poverty will also keep up. It'll go beyond even Rangarajan. Hopefully so.
Right. Okay. So then if we set aside this debate and we agreed that growth is the way to go, where do you see the important areas that remain for us to solve as a country, not just like as a government? If we think of India, what are the things that we need to solve that are still, and we have massive legacies of this sort of anti-growth almost approach, right?
Yeah. And I think everything in many ways, right? Because everything remains a work in progress, all areas, because we have expectations of realizing what the potential is. Now, for a young economy like ours, one which has a large domestic demand like ours, one where, China labor costs rising means a lot of movement of businesses are happening, should happen much more to us. The global economy and demand therefore expanding and us being able to plug into that. The window of opportunity continues to open up. Right. I think the fact that we are growing at 7 still means that for a young economy, we can aspire to grow at 8.5, because that's the potential, right? So economic growth will mean that we reform our systems continuously in a way that you reach that production possibility frontier.
Yeah.
There's no reason why we ought to be, lower than that. And that will take everything. Now, of course, we are 2 days into the labor codes getting notified and the rules becoming, implemented. The point being, labor is one part of it. And of course, it has been a major hurdle for a while. But it helps you understand that India brought in minimum wage legislation and labor laws right after independence, within 10, 15 years. Mm-hmm. And if you look at some of the conversations between Mahalanobis and Pandit Nehru, Mahalanobis had advised him against bringing in many of these, saying that, look, Japan has had 100 years of economic growth before they brought in these legislations. So why are we raising costs so much? Why are we making it so difficult? And that helps you. The decision of Pandit Nehru helps you understand how our thought process used to be then. And I think it was meant for the right purpose, which is, the last man standing and quality of life of the most impoverished and so on. But what it effectively did is it raised the cost of doing business so much that despite having such world-class institutions, right, are all set up under Pandit Nehru's in the 50s and 60s and so on. But most of these graduates, after they would leave, didn't have much economic activity to be engaged in.
Exactly.
So majority over time started to leave to really realize their own potential. They're smart kids. Yeah. But because the markets didn't take off, largely on account of the fact that, it's not amenable to growth.
Yes.
Right? So that just tells you that, every aspect of the economy, therefore, needs to continuously become pro-growth. Now, when I say pro-growth, it's not necessarily anti-labor.
Of course.
Not at all. In fact, even the new data, if you look at the last 20 years within India, it tells you that the unemployment rates are the lowest in states that are growing the fastest.
Absolutely.
Or the states which have ease of doing business improvements, right? Which means that job creation is a byproduct of wealth creation.
Absolutely.
Right?
I'll just share with you, we have a paper that's hopefully coming out, but we do this study of what are the actual median wages versus the minimum wages in states. The states with the lowest minimum wages have the highest median wages.
Yeah, imagine.
Yeah. Right?
Imagine. So but that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes
to an
perfect
economist,
sense.
It makes perfect sense, but I think we're stuck with this legacy that says legislation is the way to improve people's lives.
Yeah.
And I think,
except I'll tell you, that is true. And that is one of the reasons why such a large part of India's economy has remained informal.
yes, exactly.
Because there are costs to doing the right thing.
Exactly.
And the right thing being established by bad laws.
Exactly.
So staying underground used to be the way of Indian firms. Right? Whether it was taxation, whether it was the size of employment they created.
Right.
And I think part of reform is to just make it easier, simpler, right? And reducing the regulatory burden, therefore, will mean that it's good for everyone, not just the firms that want to grow, but people who want to work.
Absolutely. I think, and of course, we understand this, but this is one of those zero-sum mentality problems that lie in political and economic communication, right? Everyone assumes that if somebody is getting rich, it must be at the cost of somebody else. But the positive sum world that economic growth creates means that you can become rich by making somebody else richer as well.
But though I'll tell you, there is merit to that fear based on the literature coming from the OECD nations, particularly G7, the richer nations. Because in the richer nations, there is the growth or the returns to capital has indeed been much, much higher than the GDP growth in those places. This is the Piketty kind of an argument.
Yeah, but the Piketty...
But them trying to impose this on us is absolutely no. Because ours is a government and an establishment, Rahul, where welfare has only expanded.
Yeah.
When we say basic amenities to everyone, when we say poverty decline, government and welfare programs are a large part of that, right? So we are not just saying that we will do or make all policies growth friendly and forget about welfare. That's not going to happen.
No, I mean, I'll go further, Shamika, and say even the G7 narrative, which I agree became the dominant narrative in the last 10 years, is actually, in my reading of the literature, just wrong. Piketty, Sayers and Zuckman have played fast and loose with their definitions, with their data. So
there is subsequent literature which
exactly.
questions, yes.
So even for the US, the middle class is, yes, getting smaller, but that's because the upper class is expanding. Everybody's consumption and everybody's wealth is just going up. So I completely agree with you. Just go further. But no, fair. And you wrote this very interesting paper on PMEAC about strategic resilience and both plugging into the world economy and sort of being careful. Tell us more about that, because I think for too many people, resilience or it results in this isolationism, right? And we don't want that because we've tried that and it hasn't worked at all. And so tell us more about that paper.
Globalization, I would say after China, we are the biggest beneficiaries of this, right? So we have gained a lot out of globalization. But we do know that the world today is very different from it was 20 years back or even 15 years back. Almost all the rich nations today are pursuing what they call industrial policy, but it's really, government support, largely driven, of course, by wanting to get strategic sectors back home.
Away from China, at least.
Away from China. And there is a lot of government money, therefore, coming into what used to be called free trade until a few years back. So free trade from a classical perspective doesn't really exist, right? Perhaps it never did. But when you look at the data, the global trade alert data, for instance, then you notice that, of the top 10 economies, majority of the support that these countries give are not in the form of raising barriers through tariffs, but through giving export subsidies and direct subsidies. Right? Now, but these are still subsidies, which means they bear a lot of the early fixed cost and, which goes into making industry competitive and scaling globally.
Right.
Now, in India, for a long time, because we didn't have the means, tariff was the instrument of choice.
Yeah.
But it does a lot of damage over time as well, because that kind of protectionism means that quality suffers.
Absolutely.
We also have...
Everybody else in the economy suffers.
Everybody else in the economy, because eventually your consumers are cross-subsidizing the lack of innovation that happens in industry. So I think figuring that out and seeing it in the data gives you an insight, therefore, that we have to make our industry competitive now, which means scale is one. But the other is that, development of R&D and investing in innovation becomes very critical, which is where, while we are coming up with newer trade accords and we are entering all kinds of trade agreements with different countries and blocs, we are also pumping in through RDI, ANRF type of schemes. We are trying to promote innovation and development so that the quality of products and services, and we just become a better and a faster growing, but quality is also therefore taken care of.
Absolutely.
Now, to your question of do we go back to the insular? There are pressures domestically, just like when you read in the US, this whole Detroit region going red and therefore voting in ways to get jobs back. Livelihood is very closely linked with Make in India or manufacturing anywhere.
Yes.
Right? So if we just follow the simple rules of globalization, jobs ought to go to wherever it's cheapest.
Yes.
Right? Except that cheap product at the end of the day is not the only thing we aspire.
Right.
We also care about livelihoods. So that industrial policy which countries are following, India also has, we also have our own. Right? So we are definitely not going back to a pre-1991 era,
Right.
if that is the question. But that is a red flag which ought to be raised repeatedly.
Absolutely.
Because every economy, there are tendencies to go back to comfortable for some at the expense of the larger market.
Exactly. And I think, again, I mean, you spoke about the labor laws or the labor codes being notified, but I think the quality control orders being revoked is another fantastic signal that the government is very clear on sort of these kinds of costs and it wants to go back on it. So again, I think like from my perspective, I'm really pleased and quite happy on some of these things. Any closing thoughts, Shamika, on things that you think we haven't covered or things that you'd like to cover or for people to know?
Why Aatmanirbharta, Rahul? I think that is the question that people have at the back of their minds, and we do owe an explanation. Aatmanirbharta is about jobs that we make in India, because if you look at the list of things we import, it's not the theoretical, this argument that we are importing high technology stuff. No, umbrellas, sofas, simple apparel, incense sticks. These are not high tech, and that is a very long list of products. Make in India will mean that we begin to produce a lot of these things domestically because we have the capability and we need the jobs. So we just have to make it possible.
Competitive.
It has to be competitive.
We have to make the ecosystem competitive.
Absolutely. Right. So that's number one. Livelihood matters a lot. Number two, there are certain strategic sectors in the economy where you do not want to be over-dependent on any external forces. Right. Food is one of them. And if you just look at the food production index, which measures what share of consumption is produced domestically, let's say, we are now at around 130, which means of the 100 things or 100% of what we consume, 130 is what we're producing. So our production is now a lot more than what we are. Of course, a lot of that production is still food grains and,
because of massive policy distortions.
Massive policy. But what we have noticed in the last 12 years, if you look at the household consumption, is that, 10, 11 years back, only 63% Indians ate fresh fruits of any kind. Today, that number is above 90 across the country and throughout the year.
Very interesting.
Right? So in some ways, we are saying for perishable item like fruits, which is not that we are producing fruits everywhere, but it tells you that the back-end logistics supply chain part of it has been taken care of to a significant level, which means availability is there and people are consuming. From a health perspective also, this is good because it tells you that people are moving away from simple carbs towards healthier diet, right? So fresh fruits have witnessed the fastest growth. Fisheries have witnessed very high growth. Eggs, meat, so milk and milk products. All of this diversification means that while food security has been achieved, the production is also now increasingly keeping up with changing tastes of a middle income country.
Right.
So we are no longer only food heavy and within food carb heavy. So all these changes that are happening on the ground, Rahul, are indicative of what is happening to the economy as a whole.
Right.
So food becomes very important. Second is energy. Now, the whole Russia-Ukraine war and the stance we have taken is almost entirely dependent on the fact that almost 33% of our overall energy used is imported, right? Which is the highest amongst any of the large economies. The Chinese have stabilized it around 13-14%. The Americans, after shale discovery, have actually actively brought it down to single digits. We continue to import large amount because we need to, right? Which also then helps you understand why we are making such a big push for renewables.
Right. Because we're solar rich.
We have to, right? One, it is responsible. But from an energy security perspective, we have to make these kind of investments. So that's the second. And third, of course, when you go into defense, then all this change that you are seeing, whether it is through DRDO, whether it is through the ISRO-linked or whatever, we are now exporting missiles and weapons, right? Which is, of course, the ticket sizes are still small, but it's a far cry from where we were even 20 years back, 10 years back. So I think these are certain sectors in which when we say Aatmanirbhar Bharat, there is a thinking, there's a philosophy, which is translating into jobs, which is translating into technology transfers, and eventually, I think, better quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely, Shamika. I think there will be some people who may disagree, but I think by and large, there would be a broad amount of agreement that these are strategically important things that require policy. But I think even there, objectives versus instruments, right? Like in the past, even for strategically important things like food, we've picked instruments that give us the opposite result of what we would like, right? And so I think the important thing going forward probably is how do we figure out what policy gets us better results, even in strategic areas.
And you are seeing this in the form of the committees which have been established for deregulation.
Yes.
Again, labor was not a part of it. You've already heard the quality control, etc. You are going to see a series of this happen, largely because I think for too long we have had policy making which have dealt with symptoms, not the deeper malaise, right? So it means regulation also, which then goes back to principle-based regulation. Otherwise, it's just too much of micromanagement, right? And all that micromanagement means a bloated state.
Yes.
Bloated, by the way, to just break this one myth where people think government of India or government in India is very large. That's not true. We actually have acute shortages, right? Right from all levels, which means we need to expand the size of the government to keep up with the fast-growing, dynamic economy like ours, but not the kind that existed before.
Ineffective, I think.
Ineffective and also coming in the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, unnecessary. Compliance is
counterproductive
extremely counterproductive.
Yes,
so I think a lot of the changes you have seen in the last few years and you're likely to continue seeing in the near future are driven by this core philosophy. Let's simplify. Let's get government out of where it ought not to be.
And doing better where it ought to be. And,
absolutely.
Both of these things.
Absolutely. And you've seen growth numbers begin to therefore, now the GST, the simplification that happened. You saw that, now that number hasn't come in. We will see the next quarter numbers come in. But, for those of us who we don't watch economy quarter to quarter. I'm much more interested in the longer term structural. I think all of these will help us take us to the production possibility frontier. 8 and 8.5 is something we should definitely be targeting.
Yeah, 8.5% growth for India. I think we can close on no better message. Thank you so much, Shamika.
You're welcome. Thank you.